January 17, 1942. The Pacific before dawn was unnaturally still. A cold, blue-black ocean rolled beneath a sky without stars. On the decks of American aircraft carriers, engines sat silent, metal skins damp with salt air. The hour was just before sunrise, a moment the Japanese Imperial Navy believed belonged only to rest, routine, and certainty. In the east, a faint line of gray hinted at morning, but no enemy should have been awake yet. No enemy, at least, according to doctrine. What happened in those minutes before dawn would ripple across the Pacific War and fracture assumptions that had guided Japanese naval strategy for decades. By early 1942, Japan stood at the height of its initial wartime expansion. Pearl Harbor had been struck. Southeast Asia was falling with shocking speed. Singapore, the Gibraltar of the East, would soon collapse. Japanese commanders believed they had mastered the rhythm of modern naval warfare. Battles, they assumed, would unfold according to established patterns: reconnaissance at first light, calculated maneuver, then decisive engagement when the sun was high enough to see clearly. Night and dawn were dangerous, unpredictable, inefficient. This belief was deeply embedded in Imperial naval thinking. American carrier doctrine did not share that belief. For Japanese commanders, aircraft carriers were important but still secondary to battleships, the traditional arbiters of sea power. Carriers were expected to support the fleet, soften the enemy, and prepare the way for the decisive surface battle. Aircraft were tools, not the center of gravity. Launching them
in darkness or twilight was viewed as reckless, even irresponsible. Accidents would multiply, coordination would collapse. The risk outweighed the reward. That assumption would soon betray them. In the months after Pearl Harbor, the United States Navy faced a brutal reality. Its battleships lay damaged or sunk in Hawaiian waters. Its surface fleet was outnumbered and scattered. What remained operational were aircraft carriers, mobile airfields carrying not just planes, but a radically different way of thinking. American naval planners understood that they could not win by matching Japan ship for ship. They would have to outthink, outmaneuver, and disrupt. One idea kept returning: time. Not time measured in months or years, but time measured in minutes, specifically the minutes before dawn. American carrier crews trained relentlessly to launch aircraft earlier and earlier, pushing into darkness and twilight. Deck crews memorized hand signals barely visible in low light. Pilots learned to trust instruments and instinct when the horizon disappeared. It was dangerous, accidents did happen, but the doctrine persisted because the payoff was immense: surprise. Japanese records from the early Pacific War repeatedly reveal a confidence bordering on certainty that no major airstrike would occur before full daylight. Reconnaissance schedules reflected this belief. Combat air patrols were thinner in the early morning. Commanders expected warnings, expected time to react. Dawn was supposed to be safe. It was not. On multiple occasions, most famously during the Battle of Midway later in 1942, but also in earlier carrier actions, American aircraft appeared in the sky when Japanese decks were least prepared. Carrier logs, after-action reports, and post-war interrogations of Japanese officers all point to the same shock. Planes arriving before breakfast, before flight decks were fully armed, before defensive formations were set. One recurring detail appears in these accounts: the sound. The low, rising hum of aircraft engines cutting through morning stillness. Not the roar of a massed daylight strike, but something more unsettling. Engines emerging from the quiet, growing louder before eyes could confirm what ears already feared. That sound became a symbol of American unpredictability, a reminder that assumptions were now liabilities. Japanese commanders had expected caution. They experienced audacity. In official Japanese naval analyses compiled after the war, early morning American carrier launches were cited as a critical psychological factor. One officer noted that the enemy, quote, appeared to operate without regard for established limits of safety, end quote. An observation meant as criticism, but revealing something deeper. American forces were willing to accept calculated risk to gain initiative. Japanese doctrine prized precision and control. American doctrine increasingly prized momentum. The contrast was stark on carrier decks. Japanese carriers, designed for efficiency, often kept aircraft below decks until shortly before launch. Fueling and arming took time. American carriers, by contrast, frequently staged aircraft earlier, accepting congestion and danger in exchange for speed. When dawn arrived, American planes were already airborne. Japanese planes were still being prepared. The expectation of order collided with the reality of chaos. This collision reshaped perception. Japanese commanders began to realize that the States was not merely industrially powerful, but doctrinally flexible. It could absorb losses, adopt procedures, and challenge conventions without hesitation. American abundance was not only material, steel, fuel, aircraft, but conceptual. There were always more pilots training, more crews rotating, more ideas being tested. The recurring symbol of this abundance was the aircraft engine itself, reliable, repeatable, replaceable. Where Japan carefully husbanded elite pilots and treated aircraft as precious assets, the United States treated them as instruments of sustained pressure. Engines roared at dawn because there would be more engines tomorrow, more fuel, more pilots, more carriers. As the war progressed, this realization deepened. Dawn attacks became expected, then dreaded. Japanese defenses adjusted, but never fully erased the sense that the enemy could appear at any hour. The morning sky was no longer neutral, it was contested, uncertain. By 1945, Japanese naval officers writing in defeat acknowledged that their early assumptions about American operational limits had been catastrophically wrong. The belief that no one would dare launch large-scale carrier strikes before full daylight had shaped planning, deployments, and confidence. When that belief collapsed, so did the illusion of control. In retrospect, the dawn launches were more than tactical decisions. They were expressions of a broader ideology. Democracy, for all its messiness, could move quickly when survival demanded it. It could decentralize decisions, empower initiative, and tolerate risk in pursuit of momentum. The United States did not wait for perfect conditions. It created advantage out of imperfection. The Pacific at dawn never returned to silence after that. Every faint engine sound carried possibility. Every sunrise carried threat. And in that quiet moment before daylight, when Japanese commanders once believed the sea belonged only to routine, they learned a larger truth of the war. Freedom and abundance do not always announce themselves at convenient hours. Sometimes they arrive early, before dawn, carried on the sound of engines that refuse to wait.